Welcome everyone to the Wednesday edition of Jim's Weekly Rankings here, of course, going over all different quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends for your Week 5 starts, trying to answer, I think, some of the complicated questions, and there certainly are. Reminder to folks that this is the first week with bye weeks, also the first week with European games. Thanks, Vikings-Jets, for our London matchup. That will certainly not complicate things at all, Jim, but I'm looking forward to diving into it here, and we'll go right at with the quarterback position, and I think you correctly called the Baker Mayfield explosion last week. I had a friend ask me, do I play Jordan Love or do I play Baker Mayfield? And I said, oh, I think you can play Jordan Love. That'll be the right call. And after halftime, it looked really, really bad. Thankfully, Jordan Love ended up turning things around. My Packers, of course, still lost. But Baker Mayfield was consistently excellent. Mike Evans was finally involved. It's going to be really interesting because tomorrow, Thursday game between the Falcons and Buccaneers, there's a lot on the line. I think for the Falcons, certainly a home game, trying to get off from that bad start that they had to begin the year and to reestablish that they are a playoff contender, whereas the Buccaneers have survived most of the pitfalls they've had this year, might not be as invested in proving to the collective national audience. But at the same breath, I think Baker Mayfield probably is a good play this week.
Yeah, Baker Mayfield has been very easy to identify through 4 weeks now. And it was kind of what I suspected before the season. If he is going to be pressured, it's going to be a long day. If he's not going to be pressured, Baker Mayfield is going to eat. He's been without his right tackle, Luke Gadecki, for a couple of weeks, and that's been problematic as a concussion. Don't know when the young man's coming back, but hopefully he's healthy and feeling better. But all that said, it still doesn't matter. Baker Mayfield had 2 games. Washington week 1, they don't pressure. Philly, like I said, once in a while, Jalen Carter on the inside gets some pressure. Nobody else gets pressure. In those 2 games, Baker Mayfield has a total of 7 combined touchdowns, averaging over 300 yards. Well, he played Detroit and Denver in the middle. Both of those teams have really good pass rushes. 1 passing touchdown in each game, averaging about 170 yards. So it's super simple. Mayfield's terrible against pressure. He's great against no pressure. Guess what Atlanta can't do? Pressure to passer. They're probably a bottom 5 or so team. They brought in Matthew Judon, but I always thought he was a decent pass rusher who needs to be part of something bigger. There's no pass rush in Atlanta. So Baker Mayfield, light him up again.
Interesting, because the Falcons secondary, obviously pretty good, right? Jesse Bates has been one of the better safeties in the league for a number of years. The Justin Simmons signing, I had no idea why he was available for as long as he was. I've been pounding the table for my Packers to sign him. So their secondary, pretty loaded. And yet in that same breath, if you're not able to get to Baker Mayfield, make him uncomfortable, move off the spots, there's only so much you can do when schematically the offense knows what they want to do before the defense. You're as defense, you're reacting. I agree with you. I think, and certainly with the bye weeks too, you're losing Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts in that equation. I mean, at least 2 of those quarterbacks you're at least considering start week to week. So Baker Mayfield, especially in shallow leagues, if he's available, obvious start, I think, for a lot of folks out there. And let's talk about Justin Fields.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
Quick, one more thing. And you do mention the secondary. Doesn't bother me. You got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin. I don't care. If maybe you got Patrick Surtain, I might get a little nervous for Evans,
Sure.
Or maybe, one of these elite corners. But AJ Terrell, Mike Evans is not going to blink his eye, right? And Chris Godwin in the side can just like, okay, whatever. D. Alford, you're a little tiny dude, and I'm a big rocked up, slot guy. So I think that they might have a good secondary, but again, you got 2, like Evans, a Hall of Famer, Godwin is a superstar. That really is a great advantage. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about like streaming quarterback options again with the multiple bye week teams that might matter for this week. Justin Fields has been, I think, quietly, is it fair to say, disappointing? Like if you were saying Justin Fields, if he starts, is going to be a league winner. Look what happened 2 years ago for the Bears. Well, he started 4 weeks now, and this was the first week that I think he really had a significant fantasy difference at the quarterback position. I mean, not without fault. It's because he started running the ball, right, against the Colts, kind of coming back there, making some plays with his legs, and that was where he had a good fantasy week. Is that replicable against the Cowboys? And certainly with DeMarcus Lawrence out, Micah Parsons likely out as well too for this one. They're probably ripe to get picked off a little bit, ready for a bad defense, or at least the polite way of putting the Cowboys defense has been opportunistic, right? That's the way you'd say it.
Yes, I do have Fields as my quarterback 9, but there's a little concern. Here's the thing. You're right about the points you made about Fields, but why did Fields really have a big game last week? Well, the Steelers defense fell behind, and that hasn't happened much all year. They've been in close games, and that's their model. Their model is play defense, run the ball, and Justin Fields, we're not going to let you make mistakes. Well, they fell way behind in this game, And fortunately, the Colts have no pass rush. The Colts were without their top 2 corners. Brents is on IR, and Kenny Moore, a little 5'9" dude, but he still was out. And so this was a compromised defense, no DeForest Buckner. So if there was any game where the Steelers defense was going to fall behind and Justin Fields was going to have to get fantasy production, it was a perfect storm. But like you said with Dallas right now, Trevon Diggs a nice corner, certainly. But if, even if he's not George Pickens, I like George Pickens there. And there's no other resistance. That pass rush was terrible this year with Parsons and Lawrence. And like you said, they're gone. So yes, you've got to rank Fields inside the top 10, not like hugely inside, because if that defense does their job, they might not turn him loose again. And that has been the model. Remember, the rushing attempts, he had 14 in week 1, 8 in week 2, 6 in week 3. Got back to 10, which was better last week. So there is a little nervousness that that defense really puts their foot down. Dallas has been bad against the run, and as bad as Najee Harris is, you might see 25 carries out of him. So there's a little bit of nervousness there, Joe.
So just to be clear, you would rather play Justin Fields over Dak Prescott, again, going against that Steelers defense, or Joe Burrow against the Ravens defense?
I think I would. I think the Steelers defense, that Dallas offensive line is a real problem. And I know Dak's a supercomputer, right? He totally is. He's just like the robot back there. He makes the great reads. But Pittsburgh's going to put a lot of pressure up on them. And CeeDee Lamb will get something done. I just don't think it's a high volume. I don't think Dallas is scoring a lot of points here. I think Dallas is going to really struggle to get over 17 points in this game, and Fields' rushing production would be something that you want to look at there. So, but I have Dak Prescott down to quarterback 11, 2 spots behind Field. And it's very negligible when you're that close in the rankings. Sure. You could start either. I think Fields has a better floor actually in this game, because this could be one of those Dak Prescott implosion games. They don't happen often, but they do happen.
So I do the weekly gambling article. Be probably posted a couple hours after this show concludes here. And I've been doing okay against the spread. If I'm being honest, Jim, a lot of it's just gut leans. Like, okay, I've watched enough football. I know what this is. I know what this team looks like. And that's how I'm picking these things and being successful. But the one that I kind of had to waffle on a bit was, I think that the Steelers are favored by 2.5 or 3.5 in this game against the Cowboys. And it seems like every single thing is going against Dallas, right? Like, you're missing DeMarcus Lawrence for an extended period of time. Micah Parsons he likely hasn't been ruled out yet, but he will be. The defense of the Steelers is really good. Justin Fields has looked really good. This is one of those games, and I can say this as a Packer fan, that Mike McCarthy would get up for. Like, he'll get his team ready to actually go above the expectations. It's when the Cowboys are favored and the Cowboys are expected to be really good, and they're entering the playoffs against an upstart Packer team who can't do a whole lot of things successfully. That's when Mike McCarthy and his teams seem to struggle. But when the narrative is reversed, I get a little bit, I don't know. I've watched enough years of Mike McCarthy as my head coach to know that this is one of those I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys offense does something you wouldn't anticipate, because you wouldn't anticipate it. That's why they are able to do it. It's like when there's no expectations, they do fine. So I'm really interested to see how this will work. I actually picked the Cowboys to cover the spread, and I think the Cowboys will win this. But there is no numerical reason for it. There's no reason on tape. It's just a complete gut lean, and we'll have to find out. So
you have a little history going with you here, though. Mike Tomlin's teams, they know they're like a favorite and it's a non-divisional game. They lay eggs frequently against teams they should wipe the floor with. And that has been a very common occurrence. And in this game, they're going to see a wounded Dallas team, and they're I call it the subliminal switch, and you have no control over it. And when they know there's no Lawrence, there's no Parsons, in the back of their mind, they won this game. And you can't turn that switch off. So if they go in, Mike Tomlin is not good at motivating when they're in those situations.
Yeah, it's interesting to note, at least. I think we could safely say that Mahomes is out of this quarterback 1 tier, even with the bye weeks. You think about that Rashee Rice injury. We have had good news in the fact that there's been no news with the reported possible ACL tear. That's something to monitor, but certainly won't impact things this week. Obviously, Travis Kelce got more involved. We'll talk about the Titans a little bit later on, but I think Mahomes is far outside that quarterback 1 conversation. So when we're saying Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, you're playing Fields over them, there's some discussion. I don't think there's any discussion Fields over Mahomes. And I think Fields over Anthony Richardson is also a 0 conversation starter. You're playing Fields every single time. I think if you were to interview the Colts front office staff, Chris Ballard and the like, with one of those truth serum things that you see in Men in Black or whatever else, they would tell you, I kind of wish Anthony Richardson had been injured a little bit longer, because our jobs will be safer if Joe Flacco is the starting quarterback for Indianapolis. And we don't know if that's the case. The reports were that this was not a very serious thing. I think Shane Steichen, the head coach for the Colts, said it was just a minor hip thing or whatever else. I think they would have maybe wanted to embellish that a bit longer or a bit more, because if Richardson was out, I would feel better about their chances in winning this game with Flacco as the coach. Look at what happened to the offense. Michael Pittman was great. Josh Downs became a relevant waiver wire pickup this week, all because it was Joe Flacco against a theoretically good match against the Steelers. So are you assuming Richardson plays this week? And if so, where is he on your rankings?
I tell you what, Anthony Richardson will do everything in his power to get on that field because he knows Flacco's a better quarterback. And there's no way he doesn't know that. He has to know when they went out there, oh my gosh, I can't do that with an offense. Maybe they obviously these players have a lot of confidence, but he has to know he saw what he saw, that Josh Downs and Pittman went off. And that said, he'll get on the field if he can suit up, he's suiting up, because the longer he sits out, and Flacco plays well. And Flacco, remember last year, that was in a bad situation with Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
Their offensive line was decimated. They didn't have a lot of depth at receiver either. It was like Cooper and Njoku had screens, and that was it. Well, Flacco has a good offensive line here. He has a great slot receiver. I'd say great in Downs. And he has Pittman, and he has a vertical threat in either Alec Pierce or Adonai Mitchell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Has a tight end room where there's versatility. My goodness. So, but Anthony Richardson right now, you really can't see him as a top 12 fantasy quarterback, because he's not. Week 1, he had the rushing touchdown and went well, but he hadn't been running for any type of ceiling. 37 yards was his max in 3 games, hadn't found the end zone. The passing, less than 50%. Now he got it over 50, I think, for the season with a 3 for 4 in last week. But again, we're talking 50%. And he's throwing this ball at the same speed, like whether it's deep or short. He threw this like 2 weeks ago, like this 5-yard pass. It was a laser. It was like, what are you doing, dude? Nobody's catching that football.
Yeah, I mean, I had Richardson in the Scott Fish Bowl, in a few of these super flex ones in that pick 8 through 10 range. If you had missed on the Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Mahomes, often the next pivot was Richardson. And we got the idea or the concept right with Jaden Daniels. He's a lock and load top 4 play every week, but the concept was applied for Anthony Richardson at a much higher premium where his draft capital is, and he has not lived up to it at all. So good to see, at least for the Michael Pittman managers out there, because that was dire. That was one of those I'm like, I might have to cut him this week sort of situations. And obviously he explodes. Josh Downs, I think, as well as you, is a really, really good player. And that receiving group for the Colts is awesome. It's just they haven't had a quarterback to do it. So I maybe selfishly want to see Joe Flacco as the starting quarterback more, because I want more good offense in the NFL. God, we need more good offense in the NFL. And Richardson to date has not provided that. So interesting to know. As I'm doing the show here live at my home, I don't have the comment section that pulls up. So Jim, if you notice anything that's topical for this, I want you to bring it up or at least mention it. But reminder to folks that Jim does what feels like a 15-hour marathon, start-sit questions every Sunday morning, getting you prepared for your week 5 lineups. If you have any of those, again, that's not pertaining to the positional questions, certainly feel free to fire those off to Jim on Sunday. And again, we're working with limited injury knowledge. A lot of people are releasing their injury reports today. So the questions that we might have is X player going to be healthy, Jonathan Taylor, whatever else. We'll have more information come Friday and certainly come Sunday for Jim's weekly Sunday show. So make sure you check that out. Also, I've been talking about it a little bit, but we do have our fantasy and gambling content for every sport. Check out our fantasy content and football rankings, stuff like that. Everywhere you can on RotoWire, rotowire.com/try gets you full access to the site, not just football. If you want to read about how my Brewers will lose again for the 13th consecutive time in the playoffs, we got you covered there. rotowire.com/try, 48-hour access to the site, no credit cards needed. Okay. So reminder to everyone that starting this week and for the next foreseeable weeks, you have very early morning football because it'll be played overseas. Also, that you'll likely need to set your lineups by 9:30 Eastern in the morning because early morning football. That's great in certain aspects. We haven't seen a lot of whole fantasy explosions in those early games. And the first one I think is really intriguing. Now, this could be the Packer fan of me and by default NFC North hater. I think the Vikings are a good team, but they are due to have all 3 phases not play perfect at some point this season, Jim. At some point, the Vikings can't be one of the best offense, defense, and special teams in the league. I don't know if I'm a hater by saying that, but I really think a team that was projected for 7.5 wins is likely not going to be perfect all season long. What better opportunity traveling overseas in a situation they've never dealt with, going against a Jets team that really kind of needs to perform better or at least win in this outcome. I was a little bit nervous about Aaron Jones, but you have him really high this week.
Aaron Jones needs to be high every week. Aaron Jones, and I said this going into the season, Aaron Jones is a superstar. The Vikings have him a 1-year contract. They can use him up if they need to. They don't have to have any reservations like the Packers did about, however, we could frame it any way you want, but the Packers have a committee, and they have a committee with Josh Jacobs. They had a committee with Aaron Jones, and that's the way they run things. Well, yeah, Jones is playing only 60% of the snaps for week 3, but his touches, he had 16 in week 1, decent, 14 in week 2, could have been better. And then all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, it's like, nope, we're rolling with Aaron Jones. 24 touches against Houston, 26 touches against Green Bay. They are just riding him because they realize their offense right now is very difficult to stop with this configuration of Justin Jefferson. Now Jordan Addison's back. Sam Darnold has those 2 offensive tackles, and the passes are well schemed up. Jefferson, they use him a little differently every week because teams always come in with a plan to bracket him or cloud coverage, and there's always a plan to work around that. And it's going to be very hard to see this offense slow down. But Aaron Jones, yeah, he is a massive part, especially in the screen game. And the Jets, we talk about their defense, and they are great against wide receivers. Good luck with Justin Jefferson. I don't know how that's going to work, but they're not getting a lot of pressure. Hassan Reddick never showed up, and that's coming to bite them a little bit because Jermaine Johnson was hurt a couple weeks ago for the loss for the season. And they don't stop the run. The Jets they gave up 77 rushing yards to Javonte Williams last week. Oh, that's not good. That's not good. The way Javonte Williams is playing with no blocking on the line. Aaron Jones is in a smash spot here because he's in a better spot than even Justin Jefferson is because, again, Jefferson will be fine. And you rank him super high, but the Sauce Gardner matchup isn't optimal, but Jefferson still gets it done. But yeah, Aaron Jones right now, he is a clear running back 1 until proven otherwise.
I had James Conner initially put into my lineup. Now you're making me think things a little bit over. I get really spooked off by the London matchups. And again, I'm talking about first world problems. Do I play James Conner or Aaron Jones as my running back 2 or flex? I understand that's not where a lot of people are, but you drafted Aaron Jones likely in the 5th or 6th round. Maybe you've been afforded a few options, like if you have a Chuba Hubbard or you won the Kareem Hunt sweepstakes this week off the waiver wire. And just to reinforce, again, Aaron Jones all the way for you. He is a comfortable running back 1 for as long as he's healthy. That really feels like it's going to be the only stopping point for him. So also a PSA to folks who were in on Jonathan Brooks. He will not be playing this week. The Panthers have not opened up the practice window for him. Therefore, he literally is ineligible to return. He could return, like technically the practice window could be set, but until that is actually activated, until Brooks is practicing, there is no possibility for Jonathan Brooks to play. So out guaranteed for week 5. We'll see in the immediate future, I think. And I don't know if it's always the case in these situations. Jimmy can tell me if I'm wrong, but a team has 3 weeks to activate somebody to practice. If they are not activated within those 3 weeks, then they are done for the season. So we have entered week 1 of this 3-week window that Jonathan Brooks has not been eligible. If he is not practicing by week 7, then Brooks is done for the season. We'll have to see what that means. But with Brooks not practicing this week, and again, unable to play because he is not practicing, Chuba Hubbard, once again, has to be in your starting lineup, right?
Yeah, Chuba, look, Rachaad White last year. Volume is king in fantasy football. I will say that almost every week on a show because it's relevant. Chuba Hubbard, since Andy Dalton walked in, we saw him handle 26 touches 2 weeks ago. We saw 22 touches last week. And the beauty of Chuba Hubbard, he has a 5 and a 4 target game. If the Panthers fall behind, they'll throw to him. If the Panthers are in neutral game script, they'll run him. That offensive line they invested in the offseason, that interior, it's helping their run game. That line is better than anybody expected. When Bryce Young was that quarterback, nobody knew because he unfortunately is not an NFL quarterback. No offense, Bryce Young, but it is what it is. But right now you play Chuba Hubbard. And the Bears, they have a reputation as a good run defense. It's not really. It's a good pass defense. Great pass defense. They're getting pressure this year too, but they're really not doing great against the run. You can run on the Bears. And so, but Hubbard will get it done either way. Hubbard will get it done as a runner. He'll get it done as a receiver. But yeah, he's a volume play. And I have him as my running back 13. I mean, I got him ahead of guys like Travis Etienne, Devon Achane, who is being dragged down by his team, of course, Ramondre Stevenson. Jonathan Taylor, I don't think he's going to play. That's why I have Taylor lower. But yeah, so you load up Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The Bears defense, kind of like the Jets, has a bit of name brand recognition where you're like, wait, do I really want to play Chuba Hubbard? The Panthers offense is bad. Bears defense is really good. But it's a schematic thing and it's a matchup thing. You watched Kyren Williams in a similar spot offense-wise now at this point with all the injuries the Rams have had, and Kyren Williams was a total lights up play. And it's the exact thing. It is your catchphrase. Volume is king. That's why Kyren Williams is a fantasy play week to week, and it's why Chuba Hubbard this week against the Bears is too. You had mentioned real quick Jonathan Taylor. I would agree with you. I expect him not to play. We had the dreaded mild high ankle sprain. As Mario would say, there's no such thing. Like, it's either a high ankle sprain or it's not. It's silly that teams are doing this. Of course, the Packers, my Packers, are doing the same thing with Christian Watson. We'll find out what that means for Jonathan Taylor moving forward. If it's a mild high ankle sprain, I think you word that in a way that would say, well, it's not actually a high ankle sprain. I think the mild part is kind of changing the definition of high ankle sprain, but we'll find out if Jonathan Taylor and when Jonathan Taylor is ruled out. Where does Trey Sermon rank for you? Because right now you have him at a 30 spot, which is appropriate given our lack of news for Jonathan Taylor. But if you are of the opinion that he is going to be out, Jonathan Taylor, then where does Trey Sermon rank for you?
Yeah, Trey Sermon had him at running back 28. He's going to get some fun. Last year when he played those 4 or so games, he really wasn't targeted, like hardly at all. Mm-hmm. That's huge. If you're not getting targeted, that's a problem. And if Richardson plays, I think Richardson's more likely to take the goal line carries, despite the injury or whatnot, than Sermon is. Sermon's not a good running back. He's in a good situation. But again, we see it all the time. If you get volume, you get volume. So 28's a nice, solid, aggressive ranking. I mean, that's not quite in running back 2 range. I am a little behind Chase Brown, and maybe I should move. Maybe once Taylor's ruled out, I think I might move him ahead of Chase Brown because that matchup with Baltimore that Chase Brown has. But I can't move him past Devin Singletary. Rashad White's going to catch passes, even if he's in a diminished role. So there's just players it's hard to move him past. But I think if you're going to flex him this week, I think you're happy with that.
Well, yeah, and it's a bye week thing too. Like with 4 teams on bye, relevant guys like Saquon Barkley, whatever else, you might be forced to start even if it's outside the top 28. So I think it's a tough spot to be, unfortunately, if you need Jonathan Taylor, because the Colts are going to have their bye week coming too, so you're losing another week Jonathan Taylor in that situation. It's frustrating. I mean, I think of it kind of like the Cam Akers deal with Joe Mixon the past 2 weeks, where Akers got plenty of carries. He's obviously not very good, so didn't do a whole lot with them. And you look towards the end of last week, was Dare Gubawale getting more involved as the pass catcher. That could be the concern with the Colts if Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco, quite frankly, is your starting quarterback, less targets out there. So moving through the running backs yet, and again, we have mentioned Jonathan Brooks not eligible to practice, so he will not play. There are London games, so make sure you're setting your lineups at 9:30. And then the one that's been most frustrating to me, I was all in on many, many bad takes this year, Jim. One of them, it seemed to be, was DeAndre Swift as a guy that I very felt comfortable taking in round 7 or 8 in that Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson range. You could throw Tony Pollard in there. I was like, no, Jim. DeAndre Swift is definitely going to look good. And through 3 weeks, I had egg on my face, as I have for most of my hot takes. But of course, the week that I bench him in most of my consequential lineups, he goes nuclear. So what are we supposed to do with DeAndre Swift against the Panthers, which looks like a nice spot?
It is a great spot, and you have to roll him out there again. Coming off the game, you got to roll him out. The matchup against the Rams was easy. The matchup against the Panthers was easy. The Panthers lost Shaq Thompson. Shaq Thompson was their best remaining run defender linebacker. They already had lost Derek Brown in like week 1 maybe, and he was their best. They have like nothing in the front 7. So look, Joe, at least you bench Swift. I told people to hold him 1 more week. Actually, honestly, in full disclosure, I tell people hold him 1 more week. Let's see what he does. But a lot of people dropped him, and you didn't drop him. So at least you still got him on the roster. You still put him in your lineup the first 3 weeks, but there's that. But you go back to him. You go back to him here. He doesn't have second level vision. That's the big knock on him. But he can catch passes, and the Bears threw him 7 targets. And the reason I told people to hold him is because he had 4 and 5 targets in those prior 2 games to seeing 7 targets last week. It's just he did a lot with the targets this week. And then as a runner, he broke that long run, scored a touchdown. So big week there. But yeah, it's an easy matchup. I think the Bears win this game with some relative ease. The Panthers had those 2 games with Dalton. They played the Raiders. They played the Bengals. Those are terrible defenses. Mm-hmm. And well, now, the Bears should be able to lock down Andy Dalton. If nothing else, I don't think the Panthers score many points. So if the Bears play with a lead, then I think DeAndre Swift is going to be, you're nervous starting him. But where did I rank him? I ranked him at running back 23, which that's a reasonable ranking.
Yeah, I think about wait, because every team does this. What is my win condition? Like what is the way that the Andy Dalton Panthers? How do I win? Like what's the coaching staff question? Like that's what they're asking. Now, they have identities, they have concepts they want to apply across team to team. But if you're the Panthers, the way in which you beat the Bengals and Raiders is different than the way in which you beat the Bears. I think the Panthers, despite all their defensive limitations, want to make sure that they can put Caleb Williams in a spot to make mistakes. That they will win if Caleb Williams makes a errant throw or runs back 15 yards and then gets sacked, right? The negative game script is a benefit for the Panthers. And to do that, you can be a bit more conservative, knowing that the idea is the Bears also don't want Caleb Williams to lose the game, that they're aware of that Caleb Williams is probably the limitation week in, week out for the way in which they can lose and the win condition fails. So I think you're going to see a bit low scoring, but you can have Chuba Hubbard be successful. You can have DeAndre Swift be successful in that game script. And Roschon Johnson has looked good as a runner, but if you're the Bears, DeAndre Swift doesn't tip off the defense as much because he can be a pass catcher and be a runner, albeit inefficiently, at least through the first 3 weeks of the season. So, I will probably play DeAndre Swift, at least in my Beat Joe Bartel online championship. I didn't play him last week. That will cost me in the over in the main event sort of section things. But if you are out there and have DeAndre Swift, I'm playing him, so you shouldn't. That has been the rule of thumb, at least for the past couple of weeks. Just keep that in mind, given my luck with the DeAndre Swift stuff. So the last running back question I wanted to ask you, Jim, was in relation to what has been the top 3 drafted running backs. Now, we know the status of Christian McCaffrey is, I don't know the status, that he's going to be injured for however long. He's going overseas to do things. What'll happen post-bye? Like the Christian McCaffrey quagmire is just a toss-up in the air that I don't know how you answer at this point. But Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson have both been healthy, have been as advertised in the sense of what their expectations were within the offense. And yet Breece Hall has been super disappointing. Braylon Allen's been involved quite a bit. Bijan Robinson has been losing time with Tyler Algier. I think more so, and I think, again, this with the overseas game in London, Jets, Vikings, the question is, what do you do with Breece Hall? But how are you operating with both these guys? Are you trying to trade them off a name value for somebody else? Is it one that you'd want to kind of make that drastic move for? Or is it just status quo, hope things work out for the best for both players?
With Breece Hall, it's very difficult because we saw him last year in the worst possible scenario. I mean, A, he's coming back from an ACL last year.
Right.
B, there was no offensive line. If the Giants weren't like the worst line I ever seen, the Jets would have been the worst line in the league last year. They had no quarterback. Defenses could just go downhill against them all day long. And Breece Hall was a league winner from week 5 on. So he did that in the worst possible scenario. As a rookie, as just a straight out runner, he was 5.8 yards per carry. So now, what's going on? Well, I mean, I can point to the fact that Nathaniel Hackett is running an archaic offense. The league's defense have changed a lot, and you really got to like scheme it up differently. You can't run old school football, just like line it up and go. That's what the Packers are kind of doing, is kind of lining up and playing. They're not doing anything to dress things up. And so they're predictable, but it still shouldn't stop Breece Hall. It shouldn't matter because the line has been significantly upgraded from what it was. So I don't have an answer. Now, until last week's disaster, 10 carries, 4 yards, 2 catches, 14 yards, Hall had only had 1 game with 4 yards per carry, and it was barely, but he was getting it done as a receiver. He had 6, 8, 5 targets. He scored touchdowns in the first 3 games. So for fantasy, he got enough done. You weren't happy, but last week was a disaster. You've got to keep Hall if you have him, because he's a superstar. There is no way he's going to keep playing at this low level. It just can't happen. They've had a bit of a schedule thing too. Their schedule of the season isn't great either, but it's been a bit of a scheduling thing. Denver's way better than anybody thought defensively. Mm-hmm. That said, Breece Hall has to come around. It just has to happen. I don't know how and when, but I can't bet against him. With Bijan Robinson, we thought we would have a lot more usage than he had. Last year, like 15 carries, what may have been like his top number. He may have had 1 or 2 games of more than that. It was rare. Well, like you said, Tyler Algier gets hot hand usage last week. What? Hot hand? But that's the way they ran it. And Algier's touches weren't much different, but it was the time in the game they were using him. That was a bit of a surprise. So, but like Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson is being used as a receiver. So it's giving him a floor. But fantasy managers, again, you're not getting what you wanted when you drafted him in the middle of the first round. You were expecting like a league winner type. And now we just have a good running back. It's a problem.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would be trying to acquire Breece Hall from an anxious manager if that's the case. But
Yes.
I'd imagine in most of these leagues, and I play in a lot of expert ones, or where just a lot of smart folks are making the decisions. You don't really want to deal your first round pick at the worst value point, so it's really hard to make that. I don't know how many scenarios in which Breece Hall is being dealt from an anxious manager there are, and if they haven't already been capitalized on by that person, trading for it. So we'll have to see, but it's a tough spot to be if you were drafting running backs in those first 7 or 8 picks across those 3. So a reminder of folks that we do have a YouTube channel. Obviously you're watching this either live via Twitter, whatever else, but we have a lot of other content out there. Jim does a bunch of his different videos. We have Nick Whalen doing a lot of different content too. It's going up every day. It feels like every hour. Mason and Al been doing a great job putting together our YouTube content out there. If you have liked what you're seeing, if you like what Jim is saying, maybe not so much me, that's fine too. Hit that like button on the YouTube channel. Obviously, if you subscribe to us too, that'd be fantastic as well. Get those notifications when more content is coming out live. I'm going to have my love and hate guys, which I've been really good in the hates. Jim, that's my personality, so it's been perfect. Loves, don't worry about it. You don't have to love those as much. So that content going live, again, it feels like every hour, but certainly every day on the RotoWire YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, that'd be fantastic for us. So let's move over to the receivers. And we talked about this on the RotoWire YouTube. It was on RotoWire YouTube, but the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast yesterday. Jake Latarski and I do the Waiver Wire podcast every Tuesday. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find us there. The 2 big names were Kareem Hunt and then my guy, Dontayvion Wicks, the Packer fan. And I told Jake, and he agreed with me. I mean, I watched all of 10 minutes of that first quarter and then turned it off and then did angry chores, as my wife likes to call them, where I just stomp around the house, clean things mercilessly and try to get rid of my anger that way. Dontayvion Wicks had a really bad game. There was a dropped touchdown, which would have turned the outcome of the game, at least on a 4th down. Bad throw by Love, but it was so bad that it ended up being good. Wicks just dropped it in between the numbers. There was at least 1, if not 2, catches that were reversed because he didn't get his feet in bounds, had a turnover that came off a bounce, and yet 5 catches, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's a great fantasy day. So if you watched Wicks play, like me as a Packer fan, you were pissed. But if you played Wicks, why would you have? You would have had a great fantasy outcome. You have Christian Watson with the dreaded mild high ankle sprain, as well as Jonathan Taylor. The expectation is he will not play. I think, given Watson's injury history, he's a candidate for injury reserve, even though Matt LaFleur has mentioned that is not the case. So you're talking about Dontayvion Wicks for at least 2 weeks, if not longer, as a wide receiver 3. Now, hopefully, as a fan, the Packers are not trailing by 4 scores in the second quarter, and that's the way in which Wicks becomes more involved. But I think he's in a really good spot as the wide receiver 3 for this offense, and has proven when he's gotten that opportunity to be a fantasy factor most times.
Dontayvion Wicks proved last year. Very good route runner, physical receiver. Look, he's had some issues this year, but sometimes I wonder, it's like that running back that doesn't get enough carries. You're not in a groove. You feel like you're not part of things. I just said all this guy needs is one of the guys ahead of him to get injured. Now he's a full-time player, and he's extremely talented. He's in an offense that can never fully focus on him. You got Jaden Reed. You also got Romeo Dobbs, who does his role. It's just a role, but it's an important role. And you have tight ends that can contribute, running backs that can handle things. So the defense will never focus in on him, and the schemed up nature of that offense. So Dontayvion Wicks, obviously waivers passed for a lot of people, but he is a priority ad, even if it's for a couple weeks, because in this role, I have him as my wide receiver 23. And I talked about this last week. Rams don't have a credible pass rush. They don't have coverage guys. Their free safeties down. Like I said, Darius Williams is still on the IR. This is a team you attack. This is a team you could score a boatload of points against. And Dontayvion Wicks is in line to be a great contributor this week.
Yeah, I think he is it's not quite to the level of Deebo Samuel out, start Juwan Jennings type of thing. No one ever wants to recommend that a player off of waivers can score 45 points. That's just not going to happen. Right. But I do think the comfort level in which I would play Dontayvion Wicks over a lot of people, like Dontayvion Wicks over Jalen Waddle. We've watched that Dolphins offense, right? Like, I think at this point, especially against the Patriots, the over-under, by the way, 35.5. That's normally like week 16, 17, 18 over-unders, because Vegas knows that all the teams have quit. That's a week 5 divisional matchup with ramifications, even dumb ramifications. I'm playing Wicks over Jalen Waddle. Like, I think that's the scenario spot where you have to consider it. Again, I think the Rams offense will move the ball as well too. It's not going to be a slobber knocker. There's going to be points scored on both sides of things. So Speaking of the waiver wire guys, especially in deeper leagues, I think Tre Tucker has certainly qualified in that same range as Dontayvion Wicks. We've had the Devontae Adams saga. You're going to be answering lots of questions about that, I assume, and a lot of breaking news in the coming days and weeks. If Adams were to get traded, Jim will have you covered on the RotoWire YouTube channel if that happens, or his live stream at Jim Coventry NFL on Twitter. So what have you seen with Tre Tucker? I mean, the Raiders are giving him some carries he scored a touchdown on a jet sweep in the red zone. That was the second consecutive week they've done a play like that. I kind of am interested, especially if it's Gardner Minshew as the quarterback. If Aiden O'Connell comes in and starts, all bets are off. But I think Tre Tucker, so long as Devontae Adams out, is kind of an intriguing name in deeper formats.
I love the call you're making. It makes sense. But ultimately, Jacoby Myers would be the target leader. Brock Bowers has had 2 down weeks. He's the number 2. Tucker's the number 3. Gardner Minshew threw for 130 yards against Cleveland. Now, fortunately, Tucker had 41 of them, which worked out. Against Carolina 2 weeks ago, Minshew throws for 214 yards. We learned this about Gardner Minshew. He always starts out well, and he did. 257 and a touchdown against the Chargers, 276 and a touchdown against the Ravens. But in typical Gardner Minshew form, film is out on the new offensive end, and then teams immediately make those adjustments, take away what they know they're trying to get Minshew to do in that offense, and all of a sudden Minshew can't put yardage up. It happened in Indy. Indy was winning games, but you looked at the box scores every week, and Minshew's yardage throughout the season, down. So now we are talking a super low volume passing attack, and Aiden O'Connell is no better. And so Tre Tucker, these 2 weeks he had have been great. I just am very concerned if you start him that you're going to get the 1 for 6, and that's going to be it. So if you're in a deeper league and you have nobody, you definitely take a flyer. Tucker's very talented. There's no knock on him. But if there was any level of quarterback play there, as the number 3 option in this offense, I feel a lot better about him.
Yeah, that's fair. I think Tucker provides a speed element that Myers and Brock Bowers really don't. And like you look at what NFL offenses need to do to be successful, you have to have speed on the field. So Tucker's playing because of that, and they're using him creatively. That's my idea. Is that with the rushing opportunities, you can do more bubble stuff as well if the Raiders offense wanted to. And I also think it's the Browns defense is certainly better than their offense. Well, that goes without saying because their offense is just miserable trash. But I think like that they only got 41 yards and a touchdown. Like, okay, that's fine because that's a pretty good defensive team for Cleveland. And that unit at least seems like it's trying a bit more than whatever is happening on the offensive side for Cleveland. So I'm fine in deeper leagues for Tre Tucker. Again, that was one on the podcast we talked about where I'm going after like $6, $7, $8 bids on to make sure I can comfortably get Tre Tucker as a wide receiver 5 or 6 in my lineups. Real quick, again, with the receivers, and we had mentioned Rashee Rice, we've had a good news because there's no news scenario, and this has been now widely reported, but the assumption post-Sunday football was that Rashee Rice had torn his ACL. That has at least not been confirmed by the Chiefs. We've now went, 76 hours, whatever else, to a certain point. Well, do we have more news on Rice?
Yeah, Dr. Jesse Morse, he's on the internet, on Twitter, he's very good, but he is under the mindset there may have been so much swelling they can't get a firm evaluation on it. So
okay,
that's probably more the case of what it is than it's actually good news. There's no news, and at least he's listed out for this week. So for fantasy managers, you can use an IR spot if somebody's listed out. You've got that. Maybe we get something lucky, but I think the reason it's waiting, apparently the swelling was horrible. So there's that.
And I'll counter that with the guy that stabbed Tyrod Taylor for the Chargers, who's also prominently now on the Twitter for Steven something. I'm blanking his last name, and I apologize because he shouldn't just be known as the guy that stabbed Tyrod Taylor, but that is what happened. He has mentioned on the reports that I've watched where swelling wouldn't impact the MRI from an ACL perspective. In fact, the swelling actually helps because you have the fluids in there. So that the Chiefs haven't confirmed that there is an ACL tear, at least in his mind, was not due to the swelling of aspect. Now, the severity of the injury, whether it be a bone bruise or something more than that, that is part of the MRI aspect, but it'd be really interesting. That again, my assumption of this and the way I've seen other people who are smarter than me, I'm a few classes short of my MD at least, would say that that's a Jake Latarski line. I'll give him credit for that. It's not me. That there has been no news is good news for Rashee Rice returning at some point in the season. Right now, though, is the question we need to ask: is there anybody that we can pick up fantasy wise that could benefit with Rashee Rice out? I think Travis Kelce is somebody I would be happy to acquire now because they can't really mothball him like they have been. It seemed like wanted to for the first 3 weeks, but I don't know if there's anybody else that could really make a fantasy difference for this Chiefs offense.
So what was interesting, a couple of things. First of all, Rashee Rice was running Travis Kelce routes when he was playing. When I was watching, I was like, oh my God, it's a Kelce route. And as soon as Rice got hurt, Kelce was running Kelce routes. And guess what? He goes off. Not off, but it was a big game for him for what he had. He had more yards in that game than he had in the first three combined, I think. Well, so Travis Kelce's back. Travis Kelce, and with the low production at tight end this year, Kelce's firmly back right in the tight end one mix because they have no option but to throw him the ball. And funny thing is, so two things. First of all, who was I promoting with the Chiefs? And you're going to laugh at me and you're going to say I'm crazy, and I am. JuJu Smith-Schuster. Really? He's washed. I get it. But 9 minutes ago, Jeremy Fowler drops. And I was on the JuJu Smith-Schuster thing Tuesday. I can't even say his name. Sorry about that. JuJu Smith-Schuster. Gotta say it slow. Tongue twister otherwise.
Right.
Jeremy Fowler believes Smith-Schuster is the Chiefs receiver most likely to see a usage boost with Rice out. What was interesting, a little detective work. When they brought Smith-Schuster in, Patrick Mahomes made a real positive comment about him. I'm thinking to myself, wow. But then I look back. When Smith-Schuster was with this team in 2022, and I don't know what the health differences is. I think he was compromised then. Smith-Schuster was off to a great start with the Chiefs in 2022. 79, 89 yards, 113, 124, 88, and 74, all in the first 14 games. That was like half of his games. He was like 70 plus yards. He had a definite connection with Patrick Mahomes. Everybody forgot that. The end of his season didn't go great for whatever reason that was, but even at a 753 in the Super Bowl. So he has a connection, and Mahomes wants him there. That said, they've got Worthy to run deep. Justin Watson is bad, but he's a deep threat. He's not an underneath guy. He's a big guy, but he's not an underneath guy. They have nobody wide receiver wise underneath. Sky Moore, seriously, he can't play. So the fact that Smith-Schuster has already had production with Mahomes, be it 2022, I think he does walk in to a high target role, and he has been productive with him. So I think you're in a deeper league. Look, and again, am I excited about JuJu Smith-Schuster? No, but somebody's getting passes here.
Right. That's the exact point of things. The cover two stuff that Mel Kiper wants to banish from the league. Well, it's to stop Xavier Worthy from going crazy. It's to stop Mahomes from accentuating things on the run or out of pocket, whatever else. So if you can say it's going to be Travis Kelce, well, a defense can also say it's going to be Travis Kelce. They haven't taken it away like throughout Kelce's career. I understand that, but at a certain point, you can invest a lot of resources to make sure Travis Kelce singularly does not destroy you. And then if that happens, and there will be adjustments, then somebody else has to. And it can't be Jalen Watson. It can't be Sky Moore. It can't be Mecole Hardman. It is not Xavier Worthy either. I want to make sure people understand that. Maybe Worthy gets a few more schemed targets, but you're not putting Xavier Worthy with his speed across the middle to get schmucked by somebody who's 100 pounds heavier than him. It doesn't work that way. So just like I've seen that a lot. Oh, trade for Xavier Worthy because Rashee Rice out. No, it's not how you do things in the NFL offense. It would be fine in Madden. It's not Madden. We're playing this with real people on the football field. So I want to spend a little bit of time real quick on the tight ends, but first, a reminder to folks that we have launched the RotoWire Picks app. It offers recommendations and predictions for fantasy pick'ems and player props across all the platforms like Prize Picks, BetMGM, and more. And it's free to download on the Apple and Android store. Just sign up within the app for a subscription to unlock all the features. And if you have that RotoWire.com DFS picks and subscriber section, you get instant full access to the app just by logging in. Check it out now. Search RotoWire Picks in either app store today. Okay, so I know this is the weekly rankings with Jim, right? Like that's really cool. But rest of season, which tight end would you rather roster? Jake Ferguson or Brock Bowers? Because I think both those were outside the top 8 conventionally, and in my mind have solidified themselves as top 5 tight ends. But I want to make sure I'm not crazy in suggesting both are, at least rest of the season, clear-cut top 5 options.
Oh my gosh, so funny. We don't, for those listening, Joe and I didn't talk about this ahead of time. Joe says their top 5 options. Here are my rest of season rankings. Brock Bowers 4, Jake Ferguson 5. The lock stuff. And the only reason I have Bowers ahead of Ferguson, he's better, all right? But Devontae Adams might get traded, and that's going to mean more targets. Jake Ferguson, though, is the number 2 option in Dallas' offense, and you know they're going to pass a ton, and the quarterback play is excellent, right? So I think that's great. So we've got that. But yeah, Bowers, I think if Adams goes, I think those targets are going to be insane for Bowers. So, but yeah, you can't go wrong with either. They're both excellent options, and I have them right next to each other. Hilarious, Joe.
Who is the other three guys? So if you have Bowers 4 and Jake Ferguson 5, who are the other top three rest of the season?
Because of the Rice injury, but Kelsey number 1, because I think that he's back to his, what he was saying. I put Trey McBride number 2. He's had the concussion, but I imagine he'll be back fine. And he, with the outside receivers they have, nobody can gang up on him. So I think he's going to see a stable floor. I have Dalton Kincaid 3. I think with Josh Allen, there was a game against Miami. They ran all day because they had a big lead early and he didn't have to throw. And then, of course, the debacle with the Ravens happened where the bullies beat him up and punched him in the mouth a bunch of times. But I do think Dalton Kincaid is going to see a real high target volume. And I, believe in Josh Allen quite a bit. But that could be fluid. The whole tight end landscape's fluid. Realistically, those top 5, any of them could finish. I do think Kelsey's a cut above because Rice is gone.
Yeah.
But after that, I think you could just toss them up and they could, it's like dice. However those 4 fall, they could all be in that same range. They probably are all tied.
Well, I'll take it one step further. I think that top 5 more or less makes sense. I think Kincaid's probably the one that I'd say could fall a little bit further because there's a bit more fluctuation within that Bills offense and what you can happen. But I think that top 5 is comfortably ahead of everyone else after. So notable, Sam Laporta, who was the top tight end drafted outside that top 5. You have the Evan Ingrams and David Njoku's of the world outside Kyle Pitts and his 0 targets outside the top 5. And then there's the one that I've been asked frequently, and I have just thrown up my hands and said, I don't know. I'm sorry. It sucks. Mark Andrews. What do you do with the Ravens tight end situation right now? Because it is a dire spot, I think.
So, you know what? I'm going to go for a minute here because I complained heavily after week 1 with the Ravens head. And that's when Isaiah Likely went off and Justice Hill went off. And you probably heard me say this, Joe. I said, the most irresponsible thing the Ravens did was use Isaiah Likely and Justice Hill because they had no identity. Patrick Ricard was on the field like 20% of the time. They need him on like half. And they did it in week 2. And they had him less. I said, unless they fix this, their season is circling the drain. Well, John Harbaugh, I think, got in Todd Monken's face. He had to. Because in week 3, Ricard's out there. They run it down Dallas. And I know Dallas can't defend the run. Doesn't matter. Yep. But that team changed. And last week against the Bills, my goodness, same thing. But Ricard's playing, they're running it. They're averaging over 250 rushing yards over the last 2 games. So what's the problem? They're not throwing the ball. 18 and 15 attempts for Lamar Jackson the last 2 weeks. If you're throwing the ball 33 times, and of those 30, like last week, 18 passes, 9 went to the running backs. Right. There were only 9 passes left for everybody else. Zay Flowers, tank, did nothing. So eventually, I think the Ravens eventually, and you can't wait if you're in fantasy. I think what's going to happen, their running game is going to be so good. Defenses are going to have to make a massive adjustment. And then I think they're going to be able to integrate the pass game a bit more. Fantasy managers can't wait for that. It's going to take a number of weeks. Andrews is not going to see consistent targets for a good while because of that.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned he's outside your top 15 or at least close to that. Isaiah Likely in the same spot for the Ravens passing attack. It's just it's a tough place to be. So we had talked about rest of the season top 5 rankings. Some of your obvious names, Travis Kelce, Dalton Kincaid, are in there, and Trey McBride as well too. But Brock Bowers, Jake Ferguson, those are players that I'll go out and acquire, especially in the case of, I think Brock Bowers of 2 bad games before the Devontae Adams trade. That's one of those that you could probably get a bit more in a buy low scenario today from a tight end spot. I'll one more question because we have a little bit of time. From the tight end perspective, Tucker Kraft was probably the top pickup this week. He joins a long and lengthy list of guys that I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you have to start him, I guess. If you want to play him over Mark Andrews, fine. Or Kyle Pitts, I get it too. Really, tight end 7 through 16 is all the same person to me, and it's is the name of it. I don't know how you'd spell it out if it's 2 H's or 3, but for the tight end spot is brutal. Is there anybody that you like consequentially more than the other in that sort of range of tight ends?
You do mention Tucker Kraft, and he has been playing more snaps than Luke Musgrave all season. He had been seeing slightly more targets, but last week that changed. We saw the targets last week. Musgrave had 9 targets. Now, before it was 3, 2, and 3. Is the 9-target game an anomaly? They were trailing big against Minnesota. Mm-hmm. It probably had a lot to do with game script there. So, I think Tucker Kraft is a very good player. I think he is clearly ahead of Luke Musgrave, but he's very difficult to trust because remember, through 3 weeks, we had a 2 for 24, a 2 for 37, and a 2 for 16. That's probably who he is most weeks. I will take a chance because there's a touchdown possibility. Mm-hmm. And we know the Jets. They're not playing the Jets. Green Bay
The
is
Rams.
playing
They play the Rams.
the Rams. And yeah, there's definitely opportunities. John Johnson, the free safety's out, and that gives him an advantage. But it's a boomer bust play. But all your tight ends outside of the top 5 are boomer bust plays. So he's as good as anybody else.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for us in this edition of Jim's and Jim and I guess, weekly rankings every Wednesday. Again, I've seen a few questions in the chat. Jim is going to be set doing like a 15-hour marathon, not quite, but at least 2 hours of your start set questions Sunday morning. There is an early morning game, so you'll probably getting live updates from the chat, Jim, on if their lamps are already sunk or swimming at that point too. Trade questions, if you have them right now and they're urgent, certainly feel free to mention either Jim Coventry NFL on Twitter or myself, JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter. But otherwise, back in next Wednesday, talking more of your weekly rankings. Thanks everyone for tuning in today.